Welcome to On Contact. Today we discuss Israeli war crimes committed against the people in Gaza with filmmakers Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen.
We're throwing back the reality of Gaza into the American information space in order to show Americans the hell that their government has created.
This is really how I see Gaza, as a man-made intentional hell for what Israel considers non-humans.
Israel's policy of demographic engineering means that it must, to retain its Jewish identity, segregate or ethnically cleanse Palestinians, whose numbers compromise that identity. When the Israeli state was created in 1948, most of the residents were not Jewish. 750,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes in what is today Israel, with perhaps 40% being forced into Gaza. Gaza, in essence, is a huge open-air prison or detention center where Palestinians are trapped, part of this process of demographic engineering. Since 2006, when Israel imposed a siege on Gaza, meaning that vital supplies and material, including food, was severely rationed, the Palestinians in Gaza have endured mounting poverty and hunger. They have also endured brutal Israeli attacks aimed at fostering fear and terror, degrading infrastructure, and making daily life such a struggle that resistance becomes difficult, if not impossible. Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen, in their new film, Killing Gaza, look at the savage Israeli military attack on Gaza in 2014 and provide an intimate portrait of suffering endured by Palestinians in one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. First of all, the film is brilliant, powerful, important. Two things that moved me about it is you kept yourselves out of it, and you really let the Palestinians speak. You look at several areas. It's a global picture of Gaza. And before I begin asking specifics, for those viewers who don't know what's happening in Gaza, Max, give us a little overview of what Gaza is like, especially since the siege was imposed by the Israeli government.
Well, the siege was imposed by the Israeli government really in 2006 in order to accomplish what an advisor to Ariel Sharon, Dov Weissglass, said was putting Gaza on a diet. In other words, reducing supplies and destroying the economy, but making sure no one actually starves. And that's really the situation in Gaza right now. There isn't an economy. There are goods there, but people can't afford them. And so you just have anguish across all levels of society, which is what Israel seeks to encourage. They want to put Gaza in a kind of pressure cooker to demoralize the population to the point where they'll turn on their government that they elected in Palestinian Hamas, and put in a more passive and pliable figure like Mahmoud Abbas, who now all of a sudden isn't pliable enough, who heads the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. And so year after year, Israel tightens the screws on Gaza, wages one assault after another in order to break down the population. But as we show in our film, Killing Gaza, what they've actually done is deepen the culture of resistance across every level. And when we talk about resistance, we're not just talking about armed resistance. We're talking about creative resistance, painting, dancing, poetry.
Well, one of the things that they have been doing, they call it mowing the lawn. So every few years they will carry out these horrific military assaults. And we should be clear that the Palestinians do not have armored divisions. They do not have heavy artillery. They do not have an air force. They don't have any real centralized command and control. They don't have a navy. Israel will use its navy to shell off Gaza's on the coast, to shell Gaza. They have militias that have light weapons and some homemade rockets. And it reminds me very much of Sarajevo, where I was based. And to somehow it is, and you do use the word war in your film, but for me it's so lopsided militarily that I'm very reluctant even to use the word war. Dan, you did most of the filming? Yeah.
Yeah, I filmed the entire thing.
Okay. So you open with this border town, Shujaya, talk a little bit about what happened there in 2004. The pictures are devastating. I mean, the town is just rubble. But that's where you open the film.
Well, Shujaiya is located along the fence with Israel. So on the east side, up against what's called the buffer zone.
Well, let's just be clear that Gaza is completely surrounded by Egypt on one side, Israel, and people can't, there's no movement, there's no freedom of people can't get out. 2 million people are just trapped.
Including by sea. I mean,
including by sea, of course.
Exactly. There's no escape from Gaza. So Shujaiya is located up against the buffer zone. And so when Israel invades, every time, invariably, Shujaiya, villages like that, take the brunt of the military assault. And so there was what I think can only be described as a massacre in Shujaiya, where basically Israeli forces who are not used to facing any kind of real resistance.
They actually faced fairly fierce resistance.
Exactly.
Even though these people largely just have light arms.
Exactly, in close combat from Al-Qassam fighters, the armed wing of Hamas. And so the Israelis were really unable to deal with that. They weren't expecting it, and so the Israeli troops pulled back a little bit, and the Israeli military opened up a massive assault with artillery and bombing, and people were in their homes and just basically turned a large portion of Shujaiya to rubble. And when we arrived there, and the footage you see is basically people coming back from the shelters to dig through the rubble of their homes and find the bodies of family members, and we kind of, we're trying to document their testimonies and their stories at that point.
One of the things, this has been going on a long time. I wrote a piece for Harper's Magazine called A Gaza Diary, and I was in Han Yunis when they still had Jewish settlements, which have been removed. And I was with Joe Sacco. He illustrated the piece, the great cartoonist, Footnotes in Gaza being one of the great books on Gaza. And we heard over the loudspeakers, ta'al, ta'al, which means come in Arabic, and then curse words, ibn sharbuta, and this kind of stuff. And these little 10-year-old kids started throwing rocks. And they were shot with live ammunition. This is something you document in the film.
Well, I think what we're showing is how Gaza and the people in Gaza, especially the younger people, no longer encounter Israeli soldiers the way that they did in the scene that you documented, where there's actual direct interaction, they're being shot directly. They have to actually go to the border and to meet the soldiers. Otherwise, they encounter Israelis through drones, through F-15s, and through artillery. They basically see Israelis only through the machinery of death. That's what the Israelis would call asymmetrical warfare, or the Dahiyya doctrine. And we're talking to the people who have faced the brunt of this doctrine of disproportionate force, where the civilian population is deliberately attacked. Israel actually has a military ethicist at Tel Aviv University named Asa Kasher, whose goal or his role was to take Israel out of the Geneva Conventions where civilians exist and define civilians, in his word, as the terrorist's non-dangerous neighbor. And so we have footage of people who are not just, bombed, hit with drones, who are just civilians, often deliberately. We met Palestinians who were taken as human shields by Israeli soldiers and were used as literal shields while the soldiers sniped their neighbors to death.
Well, you also, in the film, document these efforts by, is it the Red Crescent, to go and rescue people, including this young Palestinian man who is taking a first aid team back to the rubble of his house, and they're just killed by snipers.
Yeah, I mean, this film isn't just a documentary, it's a document of Israeli war crimes, and this film needs to be entered into the record of the International Criminal Court. It's a first-person record of crimes committed under the watch of Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's
talk about Hosea. These were some of the worst crimes during the 2014 assault. And here, it was in this scene where you had the paramedics, right, who were attempting to talk about that.
The paramedics, well, there were a few instances where paramedics were opened fire on, but this one specifically is where these paramedics got a call. They were volunteers with the Red Crescent. They got a call demanding that they go rescue a man who had been tied to a tree in some kind of cruel way. And so when they went out there, an Israeli sniper instructed him to turn on a flashlight when he got to the right spot. And he turned on the flashlight, this paramedic, as he was told, and he was shot And so, this is really just shows how cruel the Israeli military can be and barbaric.
It was not only that he was shot, he was wounded, but they laid down suppressing fire so that he couldn't be rescued.
Right, exactly. So his colleagues who went out to rescue him and try to save his life in an extremely brief, period of time that they would be able to save him. Well, when they went out there, then the fire starts. And so it's just this, it's like a cruel psychological warfare, I think, is really what the Israelis are trying to do there.
They asked the ambulance driver to get out, take some steps forward to them, and then lift up, then turn his lighter on.
You're talking about the Israelis.
The Israelis.
Right.
And then they proceeded to kill the ambulance driver, Abadla, on the spot. We spoke to Desmond Travers, who is an Irish military expert who actually worked with the ICC on the Goldstone report, and he suspected that the Israelis wanted an excuse to shoot him, and that they were told that if they see cell phones, they're being told that the cell phones are used to actually as Al-Qassam command and control, and that they have justification to kill people. So that light, that torch, was the justification to kill. But these stories we documented across Gaza Strip, the Gaza Strip of field executions.
The Israelis are quite open that if you get within 100 feet of the fence, even if you're unarmed, even if you're 15 years old, you will be shot.
This is supposedly a rescue operation that was coordinated with the Israeli military, which had laid this cordon around the town, and they still executed the paramedic on the spot, while the two that we interviewed just sat there and had to watch.
The use of snipers to fire on children. I think one of the things, if you haven't been to war, you don't understand, is that if you look through a sniper scope, you know you are shooting a child. You can see the face of the person you're shooting. They're not mistaking an adolescent or a child for an adult.
Well, actually, the Israeli military recently confirmed that it's a top-down order, so they're not even chosen at random, that it's actually military policy to target children. And, these protests that we're seeing going on right now in the Great March of Return. Okay.
We'll talk about after the break. And one of the things about these protests, which we'll talk about when we come back, is that they're also targeting journalists, people clearly identified as press. When we return, we'll continue our conversation with Dan Cohen and Max Blumenthal, who made the film Killing Gaza. Welcome back to On Contact. We continue our conversation with Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen, who made the documentary Killing Gaza. Let's ask about animation, which you use, I think, quite effectively in the film. There was that great documentary on the war in Lebanon, which was completely animated.
Waltz with Bashir.
Yeah, Waltz with Bashir, which was a very fine film. But I thought you used it quite effectively.
Yeah, my friend Nuri Zander is responsible for the animation. He did an incredible job, and the reason that I asked him to provide his skills to this documentary was because we have so much testimony of atrocities, of daring escapes from death. We needed to illustrate it for viewers, and otherwise you're just going to be sitting there watching someone sitting in a dark room. And we filmed with very rudimentary equipment under difficult circumstances, so the animation simply brings the harrowing testimony that we recorded to life.
Well, this is, I think, the power of what Joe Sacco does.
Yeah.
Is that he's a rigorous reporter, as both of you are.
I mean, this isn't easy to watch.
Yeah, I know it's hard. I want to talk about the trauma which you deal with in the film. You have a scene where you center around the family of Salem Shamali. This is a 23-year-old who's killed. His killing is captured on video, and it creates a kind of international. But maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Dan.
Well, that was one of the most iconic moments and well-covered moments of the 51-day war on Gaza. It was Salem Shamali's execution by an Israeli sniper, and it was while he was searching through the rubble of Shujaiya looking for family members. Exactly. And so he was with members of the International Solidarity Movement, international activists who accompanied him to find his family members and filmed his killing. And so 2 weeks after that, we went...
Let me just interrupt, because he's shot, he's wounded, he's crying out, which we see on the video, on the ground.
He had gone to look for a cousin in the rubble who had been shot and to rescue him. He was joined by the International Solidarity Movement volunteers who filmed it. We actually recorded the testimony of one of those volunteers, Joe Catron, who witnessed his execution. And basically, he walked into the rubble. An Israeli sniper was there. He shot him once. He falls. He shot him again in the hand, and then he finishes him off.
I know. The guy's lying on the ground.
Exactly. And so we went 2 weeks later to visit the family of Salam Shamali, his parents, his younger siblings, and he was the oldest. He was the oldest of his siblings, and was kind of very much looked up to and took care of.
Well, you interview the children.
Exactly.
His brothers.
So we interview his brother Wasim, who I believe at that time was 14 years old, and Wasim was broken. I mean, just absolutely devastated by the murder of his older brother, and at that point, he could hardly get his words out. And then I went back to see Wasim about a year later to see, how he had coped with the trauma over time, how he was doing. And, you could see that his childhood, as so many children in Gaza and war zones or conflict zones are, his childhood was taken away, and he was forced to confront this brutal reality of his family being murdered. And he had decided at that point that he wanted to be a fighter. He was going to join Al-Qassam. And so he had begun that process, and there was really no turning him back. And so I think, if one day on the news when we see Wasim or, some boy like him as a young man popping out of a tunnel and taking out some Israeli soldiers, well, we can't say we didn't know why.
Yeah.
He told us.
Right. Well, we don't, unfortunately, though, we don't have the context. So we only see the action of counterviolence. And then we certify it as incomprehensible or irrational or fanatic without understanding that this is a normal process. I was at Netzarim Junction and a 19-year-old kid was shot and killed about 10 feet away from me, and I went to visit his family afterwards, and he had a 9 or 10-year-old brother, and when the news came that his brother had been killed, he disappeared from the house, and his parents found him walking towards Netzarim with a kitchen knife to attack the Israelis. These are human responses, which I think the film does a very good job of explaining. It's not irrational. It's what you do when you're trapped. And I think we also have to acknowledge there's no employment. There's nothing. These people are, tend to a room, young men. They can't get married because they don't have any kind of resources. And really the only way left, and this is, because of the Israeli siege and human rights, is the only way they have to affirm themselves is to become a shaheed or a martyr.
Exactly. This is what happens when you take away someone's dignity. They have no recourse in their life. And this is, Wasim is not an exception. I interviewed a number of young boys around Gaza who had witnessed atrocities or had even survived atrocities themselves. And they all told me, all of them told me, I want to be a fighter when I grow up.
Let's talk, Max, about the clashes along the fence, which we've seen now repeatedly. So these are large groups of unarmed Palestinians, often young boys joining these groups, defying the wishes of their parents. And they are being fired upon by the Israelis with tear gas, rubber bullets, and even live ammunition. Dozens have been killed, dozen more wounded. What are we watching here?
Well, this is another stage in the resistance of Gaza. It's moved towards the kind of Gandhian resistance that liberal pundits in the West have called on them to undertake, and they've, still been ignored by those very pundits. Dan talked about the humanity of resistance in Gaza, what drives it. The same motives are present within the armed resistance as in the unarmed resistance. And it's a desire, in their words, as they make clear to us on film, to get their rights back. They're not talking about religion. They're not talking about any wider political project. They just want their basic rights. And so they are marching to the fence. I was actually just in Gaza as this was starting to take shape. And I spoke to people in Gaza who had been denied the ability to leave for cancer treatment, and they've watched their family members die. So, I mean, across Gazan society, the siege has just devastated people. This is the response, and they are being gunned down with a shoot-to-kill policy that actually Dan, while he was in Gaza after I had left, was able to document at one of the early preliminary marches. And one of the points that Dan made to me was that in many cases, Hamas would actually obstruct these marches. They wanted to keep keep the border clear of any friction with Israelis. Now they've just decided to let Gazan civil society do what it's been dying to do for years and make this move.
I want to talk about infrastructure. Because the Israelis target infrastructure. Gaza's down to, what, 2 to 3 hours a day of electricity?
Yeah, about that.
In the film, there are 2 middle-class housing apartment complexes, the Italian compound.
And
These are all middle-class people. They were told to leave by the Israelis. They were their homes were destroyed. Water treatment, the power plant was taken out in Gaza City. Talk about how the Israelis have targeted the infrastructure and why.
Well, this is just a policy of what's been called de-development, and so taking away any bit of normalcy, ability to have an economy. We saw, as you said, so there's 2 to 3 hours of electricity per day. What can you do with that? Businesses can't function. Your home can't function. You're really limited from doing anything. You don't have hot water. You turn on the sink, you get salt water.
Well, let me
it's
just
seawater.
say that, aquifers are diverted to Israel.
Yeah, exactly. So the aquifers have been destroyed. The water is diverted. Israel intentionally deprives Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, frankly, of water. There's only seawater, and now even going to swim in the sea is impossible because Israel destroyed the sewage treatment plants. And so, if you want to go to the beach, the only reprieve Palestinians in Gaza you have to go swim in feces. And so this is just kind of the hell. I mean, this is really how I see Gaza, is a man-made intentional hell for what Israel considers non-humans. And so it impacts every aspect of life. There's suffering in every aspect of life, and there's hardly anything enjoyable or sweet about life for Palestinians. And that's, I think, where the culture of resistance comes in, that Palestinians find ways to maintain their humanity despite their environment.
You highlight that at the end of the film with poets and painters. I want to ask, just to close, we have about 3 minutes left, why did you make the film? And what do you think Israel's ultimate goal is?
I think, in highlighting the painters, we profiled the first breakdancing crew in the Gaza Strip. We have poets on film, teachers, zookeepers whose zoo was destroyed in Israeli airstrikes.
Which they built out of volunteer hands. Yeah.
And they said, the monkeys were like our family members. Yeah. The monkeys were slaughtered. But we're putting a face on people who appear only in Western media behind masks, on one of the most dehumanized populations in the world, that we don't inject ourselves in it. We're just simply there to give them voice. Right. It took 3 years to make this film. It was crowdfunded. Editing it, translating it was very difficult. And we released it on May 15th, which is Nakba Day, and it's the culmination of the Great March of Return.
Nakba is, explain what Nakba is.
The Nakba is what you discussed in the beginning, the systematic ethnic cleansing and continuous ethnic cleansing of indigenous Palestinian population, which Gaza is the result of. And we're throwing back the reality of Gaza into the American information space in order to show Americans the hell that their government has created, because ultimately here in Washington, that's where the sausage is made. We're responsible for this because of our backing of Israel, and without us, this hell would have been impossible.
What do you think Israel's, in their mind, what's their end goal, do you think?
Their end goal is the destruction of the Palestinian national movement. Palestinians will simply become Arabs and they'll drift into the Middle East. They don't even want a Palestinian Gandhi. They want a Palestinian Dalai Lama who will live on the outside and do celebrity peace concerts with, they don't want resistance.
Right, but they can't the Israelis are as fierce about keeping the Palestinians, they don't want 2 million Palestinians in Egypt. They keep that border around Rafah as tightly sealed as the Israelis do.
Gaza is a human warehouse and an ethnic prison. Those are ethnic borders. Israel cannot allow Palestinians back into what is now Israel to reunite with families because they might compromise the Jewish demographic majority. Gaza puts the lie to the concept of the Jewish and democratic state, and it puts the lie to the American idea that it's promoting democracy around the world. It is the ultimate contradiction of Western empire, and it is now put on film in, I think, the most explicit way possible.
Yeah, I think you've done a painful It's painful to watch, but
It's painful to make.
I think everybody's got to see it because, as you point out, we are deeply complicit in what's happening to the Palestinian people. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen, who made the film Killing Gaza.